In Northeast Wisconsin, making a major political endorsement today.
Bart Starr Jr., son of the legendary former Packers quarterback, now supporting Kamala Harris for president, marking his first ever Democratic vote, he says, this November. Chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman spoke exclusively with Starr. He joins us with Your Voice, Your Vote coverage. Jason.
Cami, Bart Starr Jr. has always voted as a Republican, but he did abstain from voting at the top of the ticket in the past two presidential elections. This time around, he's going a step further in joining the ranks of Republicans like Liz Cheney in casting his ballot for Kamala Harris. I spoke to Starr about that decision today in an exclusive interview. He gave a variety of reasons, citing Trump's economic policies like support for tariffs, which he says will hurt Wisconsin farmers the most by launching a trade war and raise the price of goods produced overseas. Starr also says Trump has shown lack of empathy and respect towards others, on top of not taking responsibility for the results of the 2020 presidential race when he lost to Joe Biden.
We've had a candidate for 4 years on what is my party who has been nothing but whining and complaining and lying about the election results for 4 years from 2020. That's the opposite of leadership. That creates deep levels of cynicism in the electorate.
State Republicans declining to respond. I also asked Starr about the potential pushback from people not liking his endorsement, considering the popularity of his family name. His answer coming up tonight at 5 o'clock. Bill and Cami, back to you.